Hi, I'm Mary McKenzie, the Games and Community Director at Pixelpop Festival. I'm so happy to introduce this next session, Growing an Open Source Games Community and the Growing Pains by John Bobrow. In 2018, John launched the Blinks game system, an open source, smart tabletop game system on Kickstarter, and is now supported by more than 2,500 backers. In this talk, John will share his experience founding Move 38, growing a community, and building a product and company around open source games.
Hi, my name's John Bobrow, and I'm CEO and founder of Move 38. Today I'm going to talk to you about growing an open source community, or an open source game community, and of course going to talk about some of the growing pains as well. I'm also going to be using this terrible analogy of being a gardener because I'm stuck at home right now next to my plants and feel like almost everything I think about these days relates to all the things involved in growing and keeping plants healthy and alive. So it seemed like an open source community shared a lot in common with this too. I hope you'll enjoy this, and yeah, well, let's get started. So before I really get started, you should know a little bit about me, in this case, the gardener. As I mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of Move 38. We're a new kind of game company. But before I founded this company, I used to build interactive museum installations, the kinds that would use projection mapping and software to make these large-scale interactive installations or sometimes massively multiplayer games. Here's one from the Museum of Science and Industry, where we projection map and you got to design your future car. It was really quite amazing. As I founded Move 38, we developed our flagship product, the world's first smart tabletop game system called Blinks. And it's an open source game system, and I'll get more into that in a moment. But all of the games on Blinks, the code is shared freely, and people can make their own games. So how did I get interested or involved in the idea of open source? Well, it all kind of started when I was at UCLA in 2006 and introduced to a programming language called processing. Casey Reese at the time had created this language. He was one of the co-creators. And the design of the programming language was to feel like a napkin sketch for an artist, but with code. So you could write these 4 lines of code and have an application drawing really cool graphics on screen. A number of other creative coding software languages have followed a similar path, including Open Frameworks or Arduino for hardware. Code is probably one you've never heard of, but I bring it up because while I was building those interactive museum installations, the company I was working for, we decided to open source the programming language. And I put it up here as an example of a failed open source software. And really, the thing that failed about it the most was that there wasn't a community behind it. There was a company behind it, and we used the tools internally. But we had difficulty really finding the community or supporting one. We weren't really set up for it. And as I mentioned here, open source projects, they really thrive on an active supporting community. So I also note that they're sometimes even adopted by the community. P5.js is a really beautiful example of an extension of processing. It took the same framework of processing and adapted it for JavaScript, which felt, in all honesty, more relevant these days. And the community that's grown behind this initiative is really quite special. It's worth checking out. So I'm going to carry on with our analogy here. So what was the seed? What's the seed of an open source game community? And so for me, I gave a little bit of my background where I was building interactive museum installations, but I continued my work at the MIT Media Lab, where I decided that I wanted to build tools for creativity, and I invested a lot of time and resources into making an easy to program for platform. And so while I was there, one of the best things I did was I took the work I was working on and I shared it openly and freely. And so I was building these little interactive hexagonal tiles that kind of look like this, and they communicate with each other. And at one of the events I was sharing it at, a game designer by the name of Celia Pierce, and also a game professor at Northeastern, saw them and said, "Hey John, I've got a bunch of game design students. Would you mind if I brought them over to your lab and we could try and make some games on these neat tiles you're making?" And so I said yes, and I said, I think we could make a game in maybe 3 hours, set aside some time, and yeah, we'll try to do something. And so this is actually a photo from that day where we whiteboarded for an hour, and then we programmed for an hour, and another hour was spent playtesting, and we created the very first game for the Blinks game system. That experience was really enlightening for me. I paid a lot of attention to what the people who were there were doing while using the tools I had built, and thinking about how could it be quick and easy for them to create freely. I feel like one of the most important things for any creative industry is how quickly your feedback loop works. And so I felt that a tool that I would want to use might be also a tool that others would want to use, and if I observe others using it, I could make it better. And so I continued to do that. I hosted more and more game jams. In this case, I point out, some people say if you build it, they will come. I learned as an RA at UCLA years ago that if you bring food, they will come. So if you're hosting game jams and looking for people to show up, provide food. It's a good way to get people there. So this was the seed of something. I didn't really quite know what it was yet, but I have to say the takeaway from this was just being open to the way others are reacting and what they're responding to, and if you can provide and expand on that, it seems to create for people showing up over and over again. So once we've planted the seed, I'm going to talk about the exquisite garden. So sometimes you start a garden from scratch, but other times there's incredibly fertile ground already prepared for you. And so in my case, this fertile garden is Kickstarter. Kickstarter just loves games, and they love indie games. They've raised over $1 billion for the indie game industry. This is also largely board games, so if you're interested in physical games, it's a particularly good spot. You know, the platform enabled Move38 to bring our open source game platform to life, having it funded by the community that was interested in supporting it. And the neatest thing about this is that about 2.5 years ago, we crowdfunded Blinks on the Kickstarter platform, raising over $137,000 to bring it to life. But more importantly, we had 1,000 people show up and say they were interested and pledging. And of those 1,000, more than a quarter of them bought developer kits saying, we don't just want to play games, we also want to make games. And so I have to say it's pretty difficult to find a community as supportive in this way as you would on Kickstarter, and I think it's really an amazing platform for that. one thing that I would say is a learning objective, or one of the growing pains, is when 1,000 people show up for something, there's surely going to be concerns that you may not have thought of, and open communication is so important. I say that Kickstarter backers are kind of a mixed bag. Everybody has really good intentions, but you can really be caught off guard by some comments that might be a little bit concerned about how much you're charging for a product, or the reward structure, or why a stretch goal is set a certain way. And so the learning there, I would say, is always stay positive. The internet is not an easy place to be in 2020, so give people the benefit of the doubt. And so that's really worked well for helping grow Move 38's community, and just keeping a positive community, a place that feels safe and supportive. You don't have to be positive about things that are offensive at all, and in fact, you should draw the line quickly, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So let's talk about the tool shed. We just talked about Kickstarter. Money is, in fact, a tool. It's really important to be able to support what you do and make it sustainable. There's lots of ways to do that, and this is not the only option. It just happened to be a very powerful tool for supporting our open source hardware platform. The community is also a tool, so make sure, I think Kickstarter, the best thing about it is the community that it brings to you. One tool that I wanted to champion here is one that I've really appreciated, which is we built a forum using Discourse. And I think that there's a caveat here. You can get really carried away with tools, but ultimately tools are only as good as the purpose you're using them for, how well they're helping you achieve a goal. And so as our community, as we shipped our developer kits from our Kickstarter, we launched within, honestly, probably a day, a Discourse server with a Discourse forum. And I found this to be a very user-friendly place for people to quickly access knowledge and communicate with each other. And it's really cool. I mean, people are welcoming each other and starting to do the work that I think one of the neat things about starting any community, and in this case an open source community, is that if you kind of provide the resources up front and make it easy for people to contribute, they end up doing some of the work for you. They introduce each other, they welcome each other, and they help each other out. So Discourse has been a great tool for that. Not to be confused with Discord. I'm honestly really new to Discord, but I know that the games community has really just attracted to this platform, and it's been really quite special to participate in it for Pixelpop, and I'm excited to interact with you on the platform. One of the neat things from our forum is that our community has been bringing this up recently, is it'd be nice if we had a quicker way to communicate more casually with each other. Can we start a Discord? And so I think one of the things that's a learning moment there is that, if you really pay attention, once again, listen to the community, sometimes it's just a matter of enabling and letting them kind of build in the place that they want to go. And so that leads me to the perfect next thing, which is if you talk about letting the community kind of take it where they want to take it, that can lead to all sorts of wonderful things, but it can also lead to some pretty bad things, and there are unintended consequences of that. So being open is great, but we've seen it with social media, and it's pretty, if you don't regulate something, if you're not paying attention, you don't imbue some values into the system, that you'll surely have unintended consequences. And so the gardening here that I want to talk about is diversity. And for Move 38, something really important about our platform is that we want it to be open and accessible and safe to a wide community. Growing up for me, the kinds of tech toys and tools and games were heavily marketed to boys, and it's just, I mean, besides being outdated, it's just like not a good road forward. And so I wanted to bring this up because this is an embarrassing slide, but an important one. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this is statistics from our Kickstarter visitors. And I believe we had tens of thousands of visitors to the Kickstarter page. And of those visitors, 72% were male. And this was something that was driven partially by Kickstarter's existing audience, partially by the category. But the reason why I bring it up is if you leave this unchecked, your community will stay in kind of the status quo. You'll end up stuck in what already is. And I think one of the neatest things about the indie game community is that we recognize that gamers come in all shapes and sizes, and that everybody plays games, and there are so many amazing stories and games and narratives and mechanics to be discovered by all walks of life. And so I think the best way to achieve that is for communities to have representation. And that's something that Move 38 is focused on, not only having representation on our own internal team and the way we hire, but because we publish games, we also are very mindful of trying to have an even split, getting different age groups, genders, races represented on the platform and publishing games. And it honestly requires an active effort. This is something that we've honestly talked quite a lot about internally, and I think there's a little bit of discomfort about the active aspect of it, but I think it's really important that if you don't want the status quo, you really have to actively nudge and purposefully nudge in a direction you want to see things headed. And being open is simply not enough. So I think open source communities, while open is a really great property, I think that welcoming and respectful, these are all things that I think go with the ethos and should be part of it as well. Definitely helps the community grow in, I think, a healthy way. And so the last thing that I want to talk about before I open up for a Q&A, which is the harvest. I often forget to look at all of the amazing things that come out of an open source community, and so actually preparing this presentation gave me a moment to reflect on some of the wonderful and unexpected things that come from an open source community. And so I'm just going to share a couple. In our forum, some of the things that totally caught me off guard, and this just felt on point. Blinks is a game system. It's a smart tabletop game system, and the pieces respond to touch and they communicate with each other. And this forum member made a game called Terrarium. It's not even really a game. And in fact, you have different blinks with different elements. One is the sun, and another is water, and it drips, and there's gravity. And one is soil, and if soil has water and sun, sure enough, you start to have things sprout. And so we got to see the whole process of this project grow on the forum. It was really, really quite beautiful. The other thing that I thought was really neat is collaborations. People started to work together remotely and on the forum and make this amazing game art and publish games. Some of these are remixes of games. And so by being open source with the 12 games that we published initially, people could open up those games and say, nah, I'm going to hack that. And it's not just the code that's open source. The hardware is open source. The assets are open source. So any piece of this I think it's really important to let people, and you can pick and choose. It's important to make sure you're comfortable sharing what you're sharing. But we found that there's just really, really no downside to sharing. And then, so I think, and this is just, once again, kind of the hardest here, the neatest thing about this is when I started Blinks and first kickstarted it, we only had 2 games on the system. At this point, there's over 25 published and dozens more in the forum, new ones popping up daily, and it's really, really, I think just pretty magical to open something up and create a game system that is really driven by a community that wants to create new experiences. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A, and I hope that this at least provided an informative look at what it looks like to start an open source gaming company. Thanks so much for joining this session. I can't wait to hear your Q&A, and I'm looking forward to joining you on the Discord. So definitely check us out at move38.com, and thanks again, Pixelpop Festival.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to head over to our Pixelpop Festival Discord server at discord.gg/pxp to continue the conversation and participate in the live Q&A and discussions happening in our Q&A breakout rooms. Stay tuned for our next batch of featured games, including Floppy Nights, The Forest Cathedral, and even in Arcadia.